Woo, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star, here with you. Boy, I'll tell you, on a late night, baby. Woo, but this will get out. Don't you worry. Don't you fret. This will be out. Well, it's coming out on Thursday instead of Wednesday, but you're still getting your weekly Q&A, and we'll go back to our regular Wednesday schedule. We kind of had a funny schedule towards the end of October there, and had to make sure the user podcast got out. And, we'll talk about that in a second, okay, because a lot of people have questions, and I think a lot of people didn't even realize that it came out. And I have some questions for you, the patrons, that I need your help with. But anyway, let me tell you something. So ended up some let's just put it this way, some Knight Rider Blu-rays came in, okay? Don't do it. Don't do it. I don't know. I've said this before. DVDs were a fucking golden age. They were a fucking golden age. Okay. Like the amount of special features and all this stuff that Hollywood and the entertainment industry would jam pack into these things to try to get you to buy home video again was a minor miracle. And I don't know that time is ever going to come again. And it's a time that I suppose that really only matters to the super fan. And granted, most people today aren't actually super fans. They're just like, pretending to talk about something that other people seem to care about around the water cooler or whatever. Because, come on, like these shows are shit, right? Or not Knight Rider, but, most shows today are absolutely horrendous. But regardless of that, if you want Knight Rider, and fuck, why wouldn't you? If you want some David Hasselhoff action, let me tell you, you get the original DVD sets. Do not waste your time with the newer DVD sets, or was it Mill Creek or something, I think is the name of the company that's been putting them out, or they have the new Blu-rays. Don't do it. Just don't fucking do it, because you're not going to get Knight Rider 2000, which is one of my favorite movies ever. And I mean that. Go with the OG Blu-rays, man. They used to jam pack the shit. I don't understand. Anyway, I don't know well, I do know what's going on. I get it. The whole reason that we even got all that extra content, okay, in home video releases was, again, to sell the fucking home video releases that they couldn't before. That people wouldn't buy the VHS or whatever the hell was going on. And actually, this is going to lead into kind of a subject that we're going to get into a little bit later. And like I said, this is of course, it's coming out on Thursday, but this is your Wednesday Patreon Q&A. And we do have a great question, actually, which is kind of a story that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes as well. But before I do that, let's talk about the User Podcast. Episode 1, finally. And yes, I had been, for all intents and purposes, and understand, it's not like I was just working on one episode for over a year, because I announced the User Podcast probably over a year ago now. I had been working on it, on many of the episodes, and the timeline within which I'm going to release these. This is, if you want kind of behind the scenes on this. Now, if you're not at least a $5 patron, you're not in the $5 reward tier, you don't get the User Podcast, okay? And in fact, I need those of you that are in the $5 patronage tier, let me know, did you get the User Podcast in your podcast feed, or did you have to listen to it on Patreon, like on the Patreon webpage or in the app? Let me know whether or not, because I've heard kind of both sides. Some people seem to be saying that they did get it in their podcast feed. Others are saying they had to go to Patreon, the webpage itself, to do it. And I need to know. Okay, like what? Because I want to resolve this, because again, the User Podcasts are going to come out at least once a month. So I want to make sure that you're getting them the way that you want to get them. It's very important to me, because unlike a lot of other creators and podcasters, I actually take, I take your desires, I take Patreon, and you getting access to all this content, I take that very seriously, very, very seriously. In fact, for a second, I want you to consider, okay, that, and you can see, because I'm transparent online, you can see how much I make on Patreon. I want you to consider how much content I put out on Patreon and how much money I'm making off of putting that content out on Patreon. I want you to just compare that, okay? And you tell me anyone else that would do all of that for that. And I'm not knocking what you, the actual patrons, are doing. Again, I'm trying to create content to try and get more patrons on board and try to really build a very powerful community around Sovereign Tech. Okay. I mean, that's really what I'd like to happen here. And just grasp that. And then look at the other people that maybe you donate to on Patreon, and you let me know what they push. Really. Okay. So anyway, I've talked about that before. I'm not going to go much further on that right now. But yeah, user podcasts. So what the user podcast is, this is really to kind of give you a little bit. I mean, I explain it at the beginning of the very first user podcast episode, and these are only 15, maybe some of them might go as long as 30 minutes. I can't believe that they would, but anywhere, I mean, because these are very scripted podcasts, right? And they're only available on Patreon. In the future, I may ask you, and I mean months down the line, I may ask you, the patrons, I could just do it anyway, but again, I care about what you think. I'm going to ask you for permission to release some of these, perhaps, openly, so that other people can get incentivized to come on board and want to hear this. But anyway, so these are okay. So these aren't going to be like any more than 15 to 20 minutes. Again, maybe 30 it would max out at, because I write these episodes completely. This is unlike any other podcast series really that I do, even though Game Talk is going to be a little bit scripted, I think sometimes. But this is like, I write this out. I put together all the information. If you listen to the user podcast, that was all me. I wrote that whole damn thing. It's a new way of doing things for me, but it has to be done that way to allow it to continue to be really concise, to where all of that information can be presented to you inside of 15 minutes, because otherwise I'll just ramble and I'll get into side tangents and whatever else that I usually do, which granted people seem to enjoy, like on Sovereign Tech Prime episodes or on your Q&A and other episodes that I do for Patreon. So anyway, the user podcast, it's really, and I would not begin to suggest that I deliver this level of that level of quality, but this is really, as an example, it's my cosmos. Okay. It's my Carl Sagan's cosmos. This is what I'm trying to do with this. And it's a series specifically meant to discuss, like from the beginning of the universe, which is what the first episode is about, or perhaps not the beginning, but from the beginning of the universe, and we'll go all the way, really to today and then the potential future. That is going to, with only one episode a month, even if it was 2 or 3 or 4 episodes a month, that is going to take a while to get to, okay? Because there's a lot to talk about, especially when we finally, and this won't take long to get to this part, but when we get to the human condition, there's a lot of aspects to cover, and we're going to cover all of them, or I'm going to try to anyway. And so this is really like, a very special patron, and really a guy that's very special to me, and who, has just done wonderful things for me in the past. He made the suggestion. It was kind of his idea of the user podcast, and his idea is that over the 6-year history of Sovereign Tech, like there's so many unconventional ideas that I have put out there and that I accept as, say, fact or near fact, and that I run with my, my commentary to whatever's going on in the world that we're talking about on Sovereign Tech. He said, nobody, most people can't listen to 6 years of episodes. So it'd really be a great idea if you took like a topic a piece and did like a 15-minute short episode on each one explaining your position. And I thought it was just a brilliant fucking idea. This guy has tons of brilliant ideas. He's a brilliant man. But I'm just saying that I thought that was brilliant. And I said, you know what? You're right. And we're going to make this happen. And that's part of what took it so long, was putting together. And I'm trying to make these very information dense and very, you can never make anything complete in 15 minutes. But, I wanted to make it very, at least as complete as you can put in that time frame. Get as much information as you can in that time frame, or as much speculation or whatever on whatever subject we happen to be discussing. Obviously, talking about the origin or evolution of the universe, you can't really do that in 20 minutes. I mean, you can, but you're going to be kind of brief, okay? But also, that's another thing, is that it seems like most people, so this is weird. There is data, okay, analytical data from podcast apps and other resources, other services, that most people do listen to longer podcasts. But the weird thing is that usually when you talk to somebody, like one-to-one, anecdotally, I guess you could say, because it's not the data that say, Stitcher, or not even just Stitcher, but that other podcast apps and whatever collect. You talk to them, and if you tell them that you do a 2-hour podcast, they look at you like, who the fuck would listen to a 2-hour podcast? Now, I don't know if everybody realizes that they can speed up podcasts and listen to a 2-hour podcast in less than an hour. But regardless, it seems like even though the data suggests that people like longer podcasts, there's the chance that data could be skewed. Okay. It seems to me, more anecdotally, and not just by me, other people as well that I've heard talk about this, other podcasters, people that I know personally as well, that are podcasters, that most people like a shorter show. I like a really long show, but I guess I'm odd. Well, as usual, I am fucking odd. But anyway, so that's something that I'm experimenting with as well. And that's true for Game Talk as well as User Podcast, where what is it like to do the shorter format and just have that very scripted and, information dense way of going about it, and also have some production levels. And the User Podcast, the more I experiment with it, and please give me your feedback. I want your feedback, because initially I had a lot of sound effects going during the podcast, and I listened back to it, and for me, because it's not fiction and you don't necessarily need those images in your mind, I felt like it was distracting. So I kind of went without it, but let me know. I mean, maybe I'll experiment over time with slowly adding in a little more and a little more into the User Podcast as far as various sound effects and other production level matters. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway, send me your feedback, please, on the first episode of the User Podcast. I'd love to hear from you. And also, please do let me know if you were able to get it in your podcast feed. Okay, through your Patreon podcast feed. If you were not, I really, it's very important that I know this, because I want to be able to remedy this and figure out what we can do about it. It'd be so much easier if I could just do the honor system and say, hey, look, I want to give you such and such content. Please, it'd be wonderful if you gave more than $1, but well, anyway, whatever. We're experimenting here, okay, with Patreon and so on. All right, why don't we, let's see. Well, the other thing too, I do want to just, again, I already mentioned one special patron. There's a couple patrons out there. You know how much you're doing for me and for the show. And I just want to, no need to name names unless you actually wanted me to, but I just want to give a very special thank you. And really all of you patrons, very much keep this show going. I know I've taken a moment from time to time on Patreon to tell you such, but I'm telling you now, you really keep me going. You keep this show going. Okay. Through sometimes that are tough, sometimes that are a little more joyous, sometimes they're through whatever the times, thick and thin. You patrons are really there, and you really keep this going, and I really appreciate it. And again, a special thank you to a couple of patrons out there. You know who you are. And really you honor me. So, okay. Let's get into, one last bit of shop talk, then we'll get into, one of our first questions here. Do remember that, we are in need of some new equipment, for Sovereign Tech. And, in the BDSM studio here, you can go to wishlist.sovereigntech.com. If you want to help out with that, please feel free. It's the Amazon wish list, and anything there would be supremely helpful, and it would be much appreciated. So, do check that out if you want to help out in that way as well, even though you being a patron is certainly more than enough. Okay, so this was, I believe, posted in the community tab on Patreon, which is a great way to get questions or topics that you want me to talk about to me. And it's digital license plates, yes or no? Let me read a little bit of the story here. And it's California license plates go digital. It's from KTLA 5. I'll read it because you kind of got to understand what's going on with this, and then I'll break it down on whether I say yay or nay. The license plate is going digital in an attempt to modernize one of the most basic aspects of the car. The license plate is going digital. California is one of the first states in the nation to allow new digital license plates from a company called Reviver Auto. Think of a Kindle-like display bolted to your car's bumper. The digital plates are low energy and display a basic image of your license plate number, but there is more technology at work behind the scenes that can help you pay tolls, broadcast emergency messages, and even retrieve a stolen car. I talked to Josh Windish, a tech enthusiast and early adopter of the R plates. He participated in a beta program with the company that makes them, so they installed the $700 plates on his car for free. Woo! Things cost $700. Oh, I hope that's for both of them. The plates look... Do you get a discount in Pennsylvania? Because you only have to have one on the back. And I think that's true for Florida as well. Is it only $350 then? Anyway, the plates look like a standard license plate, except they are thicker and do require a power connection. So installation on the car takes about an hour or two. Both a GPS and cellular connection are built in, as well as a battery. The display normally just shows your typical plate number, along with virtual stickers for your registration. Registration is handled electronically. The virtual stickers are updated when you renew. There's also a small message at the bottom of the plates. This message can be customized from a long list of choices that go way beyond the typical California license plate slogans and can say things like, "I'd rather be playing golf," or "Merry Christmas." Fully personalized sayings, as in something the end user would type in, are not allowed. You can probably understand why. Yeah, I mean, Stallion breaking in for a second. This is the same thing. Like, even when you get personalized license plates, pretty much every state tells you that, okay, but we have arbitrary control over what words or whatever that you can put on your personalized license plate. Like, they won't allow "fuck you" or anything like that, as much as those might be great license plates for the police to see. But anyway, you can also change the look of the display from black on white to white on black. That's actually kind of cool. That might be the coolest part of this whole thing. Because it is, Stanley breaking in for a second. I mean, basically, it appears to be, it's an e-ink display, much like exactly you would have on a Kindle e-reader, like the Kindle Oasis or the Paperwhite. And that is a very low energy affair. So plugging it in to your, regular car battery, not a huge deal. And it does have its own battery in it. I mean, this does kind of raise one of the initial problems here, is that, so does it shut off when you turn your car off? And then, like, I mean, that can raise some problems, that I don't think I even have to mention. But regardless, because these plates are digital, there are some security concerns. Oh, fine. Thankfully, somebody's got some. For starters, they could theoretically be hacked. This would allow someone to track the plate's location or even change what's displayed on the screen. The company that makes them, Reviver Auto, says that information from the plates, including usage and telematic info, is never shared with the DMV, law enforcement, or other third parties. Stallion breaking in for a second. No. Sorry. Are you an American company? Then you are required to hand over whatever data you collect in your servers that are based within the United States of America. And frankly, since the Cloud Act, it doesn't matter where the fuck you put your servers. You more or less need to hand over your data whenever America comes a-calling. So never, ever, ever, unless a company actually doesn't collect the data, which... if that's the case, if they don't collect the data, then why are they putting data collection tech in the license plate? It's because they do collect the fucking data. So unless it's something that's done completely client side, yes, they have to hand it over to the United States. They have to. You hear me? Okay, so I mean that's been proven. There's laws that have been in the books for decades that require that, and yes, it's not ancient laws that are referencing file cabinets and they just applied it to the digital age. No, these are digital age laws. Okay, that reference servers, the whole thing. The late great Casper Bowden did all the research on it, and he proved back in the 90s that it is a requirement. It is a federal requirement in the United States. If you have whatever data you have on a server, you've got to hand it over. Now, you can say, hopefully it's fucking encrypted, but I don't think that, what is it? Revolve. What's the name of the company again? Revolve Tech, Reviver Auto. Sorry. I don't think that Reviver Auto, like if you think they're not double dipping, first off, they're getting $700 a pop for, I guess, 2 plates. They're getting $700 a pop, per car to put these plates on. If you think that they're not collecting that data from their plates and selling that off somewhere or using it to subsidize something, you're crazy. Of course they are. Of course they are. They can say that they're not. No, they are. They're doing something. Otherwise, why bother collecting the data? It doesn't even make sense to collect. Now you could say, well, they might be collecting the data that way that the plates can display Amber Alerts based upon your geolocation or something like that. And that's kind of believable, but I don't trust them. Anyway, let's move on. They say they also use the same 256-bit encryption banks use to protect our money and regularly conduct tests to make sure the plates are secure. Okay, they're using encryption. They're using AES, whatever. But it's encryption just to encrypt what's transmitted. It's not to encrypt so that the people at whatever, this auto company, the plate company, can't see what's being collected. If it was something that was encrypting client side and all that they were getting were, server stored, of course, then but you see, that's my point, is that if they didn't want to do something with the data, they wouldn't bother collecting it in the first place. Okay. And really, even to do the Amber Alert style stuff, or to put out warnings or something, that's something that could really just be a one-way street. No pun intended. You don't have to be collecting data back and forth to be able to do that. You really don't. You can just put out a widespread message within a certain location that would put it out to any plate in the area. But anyway, reading on, these plates are basically a mini computer on your car, and that means they can crash. Josh told me he once had to reboot his license plate, as if the... I hear that statement alone. Hold on, honey, I got to reboot my license plate. Otherwise, I'm going to get pulled over for not having a plate. Yeah, exactly. Problem number 1, or maybe it's already problem number 7. I don't know, or maybe problem 1200. Reading on, as if the $700 price tag plus installation isn't enough, the plates also carry a monthly fee of $7. Sure, you never have to worry about sticking registration decals on your plate, and it can even display a message that your car is stolen. Ooh, that's interesting. But the high price tag will certainly prohibit the mass adoption of these high-tech plates, at least for now. So far, California is the first state to fully adopt the R plates, and Arizona is next. Texas, Florida, and Washington State have all passed programs to pilot or test them. Like any technology, the price of the plates is sure to come down. Remember how expensive flat-screen TVs were at the beginning. The tech benefits are there, but when it comes to privacy, that could be the toughest sell of all. Still, at a time when cars themselves have a cellular connection and many of the same features built in, it's not crazy to imagine a time when cars are outfitted with a similar digital screen on the front and back bumpers that can be programmed with appropriate info. Okay, so yes or no? I say no, and I also say this is playing on. Pay attention. Okay, there's so much to say about this. Pay attention to where this is being adopted. First, it's California. Arizona is next. Then Texas. Then Florida. And then maybe Washington State, though I'm sure it's only specific parts of Washington State. Notice those, especially those first few: California, Arizona, Texas, Florida. What do all of those have in common? Really, really standardized calm weather. More or less calm weather. You don't get blizzards. You don't generally get snowstorms. I know Arizona. I know northern Arizona. I know the Grand Canyon gets snow, right? I know, Northern California gets snow. I know parts of Texas get snow. I know that. But by and large, we're talking about relatively consistent weather conditions, especially with something like Florida. Yep, even Jacksonville can get snow. I know. But by and large, these are very consistent weather conditions. And that's the rub. A lot of new technologies that people want to put on the streets. Okay, for example, solar cell parking lots, right, that are literally a giant solar cell. A lot of the different electric cars that have been proposed or even put on the road over the years, besides Tesla, and so on. All of these things. Oh, you hear about them. Oh, they run the news cycle, and you hear, your Uncle John saying, "Oh, did you see? Oh, yeah, no, there's this car that can just run forever on one drop of water and all this horseshit, or with a solar collector the size of my thumbnail that's just sitting on the back, blah 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 blah." Most of these technologies will really only work where the weather is consistent and it's not and there's no fucking blizzards and there's not 12 inches of snow or whatever. These technologies don't work in the rest of the world. They only work in California, Florida, maybe Arizona, maybe Texas. But you never, they don't tell you that. You never, they don't want to admit to that, it's, you can say that they'll make them tougher at some point. And look, I know, what's going to happen if you run one of these in New England? Okay. Which, just even in Boston, where it can get negative 10 degrees often enough. I've turned on a Kindle that was sitting in a car when it was, even 20 degrees outside. Do you know how long it takes for that Kindle screen to come up? Sometimes you're lucky if it even fucking does. No, this is a terrible idea. Okay. Now, there's some cool aspects of it. Like if you could actually hack it, quote unquote, if you, the person that bought it and the owner of your car, could hack it, and you could do, speaking of Knight Rider, you could do like Knight Rider, where Knight Rider had seemingly this endless amount of license plates that it could change to, even though normally it said Knight on the license plate on it, but it could flip around to another license plate because, you'd never recognize Kit driving down the street. And, once the license plate changed, gee, I've never seen that car before, even though it looks like nothing else on the road. Really. So, but that's the funny thing, right? Is that, that'd be kind of cool if you could change your license plate and be kind of rogue about it. And fuck with the police and other people with this kind of tech. Sure, that'd be dynamite. But that might even be the real reason why there's 256-bit encryption, why they're even doing AES encryption on the plates themselves, and why they're trying to lock down the plates. It's not to secure your data, it's to keep you from taking advantage of a lot of wonderful things that this could do. What if you could actually customize that little message at the bottom? Oh, the fun things you could say on your license plate. All of that could be fun, but then that also shows that obviously the company that makes these, Reviver Auto, this could get really creepy because they could effectively put, they could hand over the quote unquote keys to this to law enforcement. Even though they say we don't share any data with law enforcement. Okay. They could hand this over to law enforcement, and law enforcement could activate a car to, have the license plate say something like, I don't know, this is a criminal, blah, 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 whatever. There's so much that can go wrong with this, and you're really just handing over. This is true with a lot of digital technologies. You are handing over your own control of the matter. Now, you could say, well, a license plate isn't that big of a deal, right? If the cops want to get you, they're going to get you. It doesn't matter what your license plate is. Yeah, that's true. But, why give them another tool to somehow paint you? And, and again, we say this all the time. Today's simple pedestrian, and I don't mean walking, today's citizen is tomorrow's criminal. All it takes is for one little law to change and some new law to come out, and then suddenly you realize, holy shit, I've been doing this terrible thing for so long, and now they're going to come get me. I don't. This is a bad idea. This is a really, really bad idea. License plates in general aren't necessarily the greatest idea that the world has ever seen. Okay, so that's getting into what if we lived in an anarchist paradise? We could talk about that, but. Just now, no. This is a bad idea. This is only going to work against you. And the privacy concerns are absolutely legitimate. They're absolutely legitimate. Yeah. So this gets a hard no from me. And there's I'm sure there's a million other things that we could really get into about this. And yeah, the price tag alone, They turned your license. I mean, your license plate is already kind of a subscription service, right? Well, now they've taken that to the absolute next level. I mean, you have to pay there's a $7 fee to have this license plate. And I don't even think, like, who's going to think that this is cool? Like, ooh, you have an e-ink license plate. I'm going to fuck you. I'm going to sleep with you tonight. Really? I mean, granted, I think there are people that shallow, but what the fuck? You know? It's so bad. All right, you know, I was going to stop there, but before I get into the next subject, like, I've said this many times before, there has really been, and I know people want to talk about environmental emissions and all these other things. Look, there's engineering ways of doing that. You don't need a computer to make this happen. There haven't been, an honest mechanic will tell you, there haven't been any real advancements. Not, I mean, you could say maybe to some degree in body design or something, there might be some advancements, but there's other problems there too. Okay. There haven't been any real advancements in the automotive, in cars, really since the 1960s. Like, air conditioning was kind of the last great advancement in cars. And everything that's really been added on since, I think, is pure bullshit. And it's not only pure bullshit, it's bad engineering, because in engineering, okay, you want to go with, you know, efficiencies, and you want to do away with a lot of non-essentials, okay? And you want to do away with non-essentials because, frankly, it's just more to go wrong. And when you consider with a car, you know, just how much your life is on the line, let alone how many other people's lives are on the line, on that your car, you know, actually functions as it should, is safe, etc. I mean, you really want to keep it simple when it comes to that. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't have some kind of flair. And, you know, I mean, sure, have your fins and all that other great shit, you know, on a car and whatever. And, I mean, you know, go for it. I guess you could put your lights on it, whatever. But bottom line being is that you really do want to keep it very, very simple. And that is the exact opposite of what's been happening in the automotive industry. And honestly, these fucking, you know, e-ink license plates, just icing on the cake. I mean, it's the cake topper, you know, at the wedding. And you know that the wedding, nobody should be wearing white because it's a funeral. It's a fucking wedding. The lives are over, you know. But it's so bad. Like, yeah, I never thought that this would exactly be where license plates would go, but whatever. I guess that's where they're going. All right, so I want to get into another subject here. And this is actually playing off of kind of a conversation that's been had over a variety of different Patreon episodes. So actually, different Sovereign Tech Patreon podcast series, really. And I'm going to talk about it here because I got a lot of questions about it. Some people had some thoughts that they shared about this. And it's something we started talking about in the recent October live Q&A hangout, where we were talking about the PlayStation Classic. So yes, we are going to talk a little video games here for this Q&A. But it's something we also ended up, Rob and I, Rob and Freebeard, who does the Star Wars update with me, on the Star Wars update, we broke in a little bit, and we just had to have a conversation because we finally got the list of games this past Monday. We got the full 20-game list, the list of games for the PlayStation Classic, which comes out December 3rd, 2018, and runs for approximately $100. And the internet seems to pretty much to agree on something for once, and that is that this is a shitty selection of games by and large. And Robin and I both felt the same way, and we broke it down game by game, and we were just like, what the fuck are they doing? And a lot of the, you know, various gaming journalist sites and you know, of course, in the comment sections of all that. And, you know, usually I don't even bother to read the comment sections on any story. But in the gaming realm, sometimes I like to. And with this story in particular, I really wanted to feel, you know, with the PlayStation Classic and the final release of the game list, I really wanted to see the reactions of, I mean, people on the internet are, well, I mean, everybody's on the internet. So it's not like, or almost everybody's on the internet, so it's not like they're not everyday people. They are, but at the same time, people passionate enough to actually comment on a story on a website and not like just on Facebook or something is not your everyday people necessarily. But I wanted to see what, kind of the passionate folk were saying about all this. And again, like it's been really across the board, just purely negative. I saw so many comments of people saying that they instantaneously canceled their pre-order. We don't have any real numbers on that, but I kind of believe that that's exactly what's happening. I will admit, and a lot of other people have said this, including the journalists themselves, and it's kind of rare, actually, that journalists will make a statement like this. And the statement that they made, I mean, they'll talk about when it happens, okay? Like when the first guy, out of Russia or whatever did the heroic work of allowing you to put 200 some odd games onto your, NES Classic, right, that came out. Of course, that was reported about, that it was hacked and everything. I mean, that makes the rounds. That's news. But usually before that happens, you don't necessarily get the comment, or you don't hear the comment this way about hacking a console. And that is that I think it was Kotaku, where the journalist said, the only reason that they could see that this is worthwhile getting and that anybody kept their pre-orders is because they just expect it to be hacked in pretty short order and they're going to be able to load other games on it. Now, that's part of, admittedly for me, I mean, that's the funny thing, is that they were saying there is value in you buying this to be hacked. Like that's what's so rare to hear, I think, from journalists, or certainly within gaming journalism, because, usually they're terrified of Sony or whoever else coming after them, for even suggesting doing such a thing. Sure, you can report that it's happened, but then to come out and actually support the matter, that's a little bit on the rarer side, unless you're, TechCrunch or Ars Technica, and you have like a really, really kind of a more powerful position, I think, as a tech journalist institution. Of course, I support, hacking consoles all day long. I mean, please, like do it right and left. But I'll admit there's kind of a double challenge here. Okay. So it's nice that the controllers are going to have, are connected via USB. I think that's been confirmed. We were talking about that, I believe, on the Star Wars update. But we also brought up the fact that these are the controllers without the DualShock, without the analog inputs that would end up coming out, a couple of years later into the PlayStation's life. And that would become essential to a lot of the biggest games in the PlayStation's history. So my worry is, okay, not only does the system need to be hacked, and this is where I like to use the word hack because I think it's heroic. Not only is this a situation where the system needs to be hacked to allow you to load on other games, okay, into the system. Not only that, but also we might have to hack it so that way we can connect DualShock controllers to it. Now, I mean, I have one, like actually right next to me here in the BDSM studio, I have a PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 1, they all kind of use the similar proprietary connector for a few years there. I have a connector where you could take a PlayStation 1 DualShock controller and at the other end of it, you plug that in, and at the other end is a USB, a male USB, USB-A, right? So, but that's the thing, is that you're going to have to do that. Like I think to really, really make this viable, you're going to have to do that. And I still stand by what I said on the Star Wars update, that I think Sony is eventually going to come out with a second PlayStation Classic, not a PlayStation 2 Classic. Again, that will come sometime, but they're gonna do a second PlayStation Classic. They'll make it a series. Maybe they'll make it like what a lot of people were wanting. Actually, was what they called. One of the things that like commenters were suggesting, a PlayStation Classic JRPG edition, right? That sort of thing I think could actually happen. But a point has been made that I want to bring up to you, because a lot of people are asking, like, really, what do you think is behind this? Like, I can't believe they didn't put it, like, if they're going to do Destruction Derby 1, why actually didn't they do Destruction Derby 2? Or instead of Twisted Metal 1, why didn't they do Twisted Metal 2, etc.? Or, here is a brilliant one that actually a Sovereign Tech listener messaged me with, is they said, wait a minute, Cool Borders 2? What about Sledstorm? Right. And Sledstorm actually kind of brings up the point. So does some of the future Wipeout games, even though the first Wipeout might be the biggest non-inclusion in this whole thing. In my opinion, I really, really think not having Wipeout on here is an insult, and it's crazy. Because the problem, I'll explain why Wipeout isn't a part of this, but Sledstorm is. Like I had said, how come Gran Turismo's not on there? Like there's so many games that should have been on there. Here may be the number one problem. The number one problem is that a lot of these games in the 90s had licensed music on them. Like Sledstorm opened up with Dragula, right? Remember that? That's kind of what made, at the time, what made it so cool. And plenty of those, I think Gran Turismo, did that have Dragula playing in it? Or was that one of the Need for Speed games? Another crazy non-inclusion. Like Need for Speed should have been there. But this is a very real thing, is that a lot of the games at the time, because of the nature of CD technology, which was new for gaming really at the time, or for console gaming anyway, that allowed for full motion video. It allowed for, CD quality music, right? No more of this MIDI stuff. I mean, like you got the real deal, and you could put full songs on there. And getting all the licensing for those songs could cost Sony. I mean, effectively, they would have to charge for the PlayStation Classic with a lot of those games on there that we're talking about that had a lot of this licensed music or whatever else on it. Could end up, they'd have to charge $500 a console, pretty much. So, yeah, I think that might be the real reason why a lot of games that people think of that, wow, why isn't this on there? I mean, one of the shocking things is the exclusion of sports games. I mean, even the NES Classic had Tecmo Bowl on it. Like, really, the exclusion of almost any sports games on that console is weird, because that was definitely, I mean, and I'm not a sports game guy, but like that was definitely one of the hottest things going for the PlayStation 1. But again, most of those sports games had then you got to pay licensing to the NFL and so on. Maybe that's why Tecmo Bowl got away with it or whatever. But yeah, I think a lot of it, I agree with other commentators. A lot of it has to do with, frankly, with licensing fees that they would have to put up. And it, like particularly with a lot of sports, the NFL and so on. I mean, the NFL was really in the 90s. It really was not the juggernaut that it is now. I mean, now it's a fucking juggernaut. I mean, it was a big deal, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And I don't think the NFL understood just how powerful video gaming would be in the 90s. And so they probably, licensed shit off for a song on the PlayStation, as to where now they know what Madden goes for. They know what this goes for, or, what they sell. And so, they have to think about that. So I really think that with the PlayStation Classic, the reason a lot of games are not on there comes down to licensing. But while this would affect the future Wipeout games like Wipeout XL and I think Wipeout 3, the first Wipeout game was all in-house music. So there's really no reason that shouldn't have been on there. And that fucking game, that's the one I think that really should have been on there. And there should have been others. Also, I found out that like Square Enix, they pretty much charge a licensing fee per game. And so getting a bunch of Final Fantasy games on there also would have been a very expensive proposition. So the fact that there's only Final Fantasy VII, not really surprising in this case. So it really comes down to the licensing. I still think I'm going to go forward with this, with my pre-order that I put down. But, if it can't be hacked, I don't know. But again, it's a challenge of, okay, what games actually work without DualShock? Yeah. I mean, there's a real chance this could end up biting Sony in the ass. Like this could almost come off as like really negative PR. As hot as the PS4 is in this console generation, I mean, yeah, like I said, I think this could end up being really, really bad. And it's interesting, something else that a lot of people have brought up is that kind of the 3D. I mean, 3D was sort of a new thing in the console generation of the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64. And that 3D really has a hard time holding up. Like that kind of it's not proto 3D as in like it wasn't 3D. It was 3D. But that early 3D does not hold up nearly as well as a lot of the 2D graphics that, of course, that the NES Classic and the Super Nintendo Classic, which even though, I don't know, because that I get that argument that the 2D stuff holds up better, and it really does. But Star Fox, I think, on the SNES Classic, I think plays beautifully and is very charming. And that's like really early 3D, I don't even know what you'd call that. You couldn't call it proto 3D. I think I'm going to end up talking about the PlayStation Classic after it comes out on Game Talk. I'll do a review of it on Game Talk, but I kind of want it, like at some point, I'm sure on a future Game Talk, we're going to talk about really the fallout of it, because again, unless it does get hacked, I think this system is, I can't believe I'm saying it because I was so excited when it was first announced. I think this system's pointless. Like it's totally pointless. They got it so dead wrong. And if you can't, it's one of those things where they're trying to ride kind of the hype train of these retro consoles. But if you can't do the console right, just don't do it. Like it's actually worse to even just try and take advantage of the hype train. If you're not going to, deal with the fact that it might be a bit of a loss leader. Not good, Sony. Not good. Anyway, a little bit of a shorter, Q&A this week, just because the schedule's been crazy. So let's get into our album of the week. And as I've said, really just since October 19th of this year, I have albums to go well into 2019 to talk about. All albums that just came out on that one day, a couple weeks ago. Crazy. So anyway, let's get into this one. And this is one that I actually teased last week that I would end up talking about. I think last week's pick was Amaranth, right? It was the Amaranth's new album, Helix. Well, ironically, this album, the first song that I heard off of it, and really where I more or less, I guess I knew of the band beforehand, but where they really caught my eye is a song that they did with Amaranth's lead singer, the absolutely beautiful and talented Elise Reed. Or Rid, or however her last name's pronounced exactly. I think it's R-Y-D. Anyway, the band is Arion. Now, it's important to spell that out because there's a lot of different Arions, okay? There's A-E-Y-R-O-N. There's a bunch. So this is A-R-I-O-N, okay? And they had a previous album called Last of Us, which I went back and listened to it. I actually already had it. I didn't realize it, but I went back and listened to it, and that's from, I think, 2015. It was good. There wasn't necessarily anything special as to where with this album, their new album that came out October 19th, 2018, Life Is Not Beautiful. That's the name of the album, is Life Is Not Beautiful. I'm not sure if that album name is a play off of Nikki Sixx's band 6 a.m., which I'm a huge fan of, and they had that big song off of their first album, the Heroin Diaries, the song called Life Is Beautiful, even though that is actually saying life is not beautiful, anyway, I'm not going to go into what that album's kind of depressing, even though it's a really great rocker. But yeah, the album is titled Life Is Not Beautiful, and this album is awesome. Certainly track 3 on it, which is what has Elise from Amaranth in it, which is the song At the Break of Dawn, is one of the best metal anthems I've heard, frankly, in years. And when you think you've heard great metal anthems and then you hear a song like At the Break of Dawn, you haven't heard great metal anthems until now. This is just, your fist is pumping, you're raising it to the sky. It is fantastic. This song alone is worth the album's price of admission. So At the Break of Dawn, certainly the best song on here and the only one with Elise on it. But there's a lot to enjoy here as well. In fact, there's even a remix version if you get the Japanese edition of the album Life Is Not Beautiful by Arion. But it opens up at the end of the fall, then it goes into No One Stands in My Way, then of course you get At the Break of Dawn, then there's The Last Sacrifice. The first 5 or 6 tracks on this are really, really rock solid. They definitely front-loaded it. The rest of the album is still pretty good. In fact, with the Japanese edition, you get some bonus tracks that have remixes of a couple of the better songs off of their first album, that being Last of Us. But yeah, there's a good solid 6 or 7 songs on this album. And again, the song At the Break of Dawn is, in my opinion, one of the best songs I've ever heard. And I really don't like to say that lightly, but it really is. I love it. I've listened to it over and over again. It instantaneously gets me hyped up. I love it. And so, for that track alone, I recommend this album. But there's actually a lot to like here. I much more enjoy the, Lisa's clean, female vocals. But the lead singer here does a fine job, and there's a lot to enjoy. It's good power metal, okay, and it's not just run of the mill power metal. It's actually very good power metal. So I recommend this album without reservation, and especially if, I think that they did a very smart move with the Japanese edition, where they give you songs from their previous album. They give you more or less the 3 songs that were really solid off of their previous album, so you don't have to buy their previous album if you don't want to. And you can just enjoy, have a really complete picture, because I think this is going to end up being a breakout album for Arion. I don't know if they're going to reach the heights of, say, that Amaranth already has achieved, or like the likes of Camelot or Nightwish and so on. But they're poised to do so. This is an album that I think has every right to take them to that point. Or other power metal acts out there. I'm really such a fan of power metal. I think the logical conclusion of power metal is like Dragon Force, which I'm a huge fan of. Which, I don't know how I missed this. I'll tell you about this quick. I don't know how I missed this, but there was, they re-released The Power Within, which was that their 2014 album. That's when they first got their new singer after BJ left. But they did a remaster of that they never released in the United States. I didn't even hear about it, but it came out in April of this year, April 2018. I don't know if I'm going to do that for an album of the week and kind of break it down. I don't think I will, because there's so many other albums to get into, but that's out there. It's called Repowered Within. The vocals sound a little odd on it, but a lot of the other sound underneath definitely comes out and shines. So, if you're needing some new Dragon Force, even though I thought that their most recent album was phenomenal, especially with the song Curse of Darkness, do check out Repowered Within. Maybe you skipped that album, and because it wasn't as good as the sequel album to that, which was that The Game. But yeah, do check that out, Repowered Within. So anyway, our album of the week is Life Is Not Beautiful, by Arion, Arion. It's important to say that, especially in the power metal scene, because there's other bands with a similar name. Hit it up, and definitely check out that song At the Break of Dawn. It's fantastic. It has a great music video too, if you want to check that out. So, all right, we're going to wrap that up. We're going to wrap up our Wednesday Q&A for this week. More content to come out this week, including the Castlevania Season 2 review, and we have some other stuff that will be coming out now. I mean, it's November now, so hey, rock and roll. We get a restart of all. You're going to get another Star Trek update. Oh, there's a lot to talk about with that. In fact, we're going to have a review of Calypso, the new short trek that's going to be coming out. You got another Relationship Rhombus. You got a Star Wars update coming up. You're going to get another Game Talk. You're going to get another user podcast. You've got all kinds of goodies coming for you, especially if you're in the $5 and up tier on Patreon. But there's plenty for you if you're just in the lower tiers as well. Thank you to the patrons that actually upgraded to the $5 tier. There were quite a few of you since content's been released. And yeah, there's not just the user podcast. There's also I do a write-up where I do a breakdown of archaeological finds for the $5 tier. And of course, you're the only ones that are going to get the video, or you're the only ones that are going to get Game Talk. And again, that's going to start being a video show, and that starts this month. So really excited to be putting that out there for you. And episode 300 is coming out this week, boys and girls. Woo, and Z's. Can't wait for that. All right, that's it for this week's Q&A. I will see all of you on the other side. Get more questions into me. Come on, get the fun stuff in. bbs@sovereigntech.com, or just message me on Patreon. I'll see you on the other side.